When God has a plan for your life, no force in this world can change it. The enemy may try to discourage you, throw obstacles in your way, or make you doubt yourself, but nothing he does can stop what God has already ordained. From the very beginning, before you took your first breath, God had a purpose for you. He formed you with a destiny in mind, a path that he laid out long before you even knew who you were. The enemy knows this, and that's why he fights so hard to make you believe that you are not capable, that you are not worthy, that somehow you have already lost. But the truth is, the battle is already won. Throughout the Bible, we see countless examples of people who faced opposition, yet God's plan for them remained unchanged. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, and sold into slavery. It seemed like everything was against him, but God had a greater plan. Even when he was falsely accused and sent to prison, God's purpose for his life could not be stopped. The very thing that the enemy used to try to destroy him became the stepping stone to his destiny. He was elevated to a position of power second only to Pharaoh, and what the enemy meant for harm, God used for good. The same is true for you. Just because you face setbacks does not mean God's plan has changed. The enemy will use disappointment, betrayal, and hardship to make you question whether God is still with you. But God does not change his mind. If he has spoken a promise over your life, it will come to pass. No one can take away what God has already ordained. The enemy may whisper lies, telling you that you have made too many mistakes, that you have wasted too much time, that it's too late for you, but he is a liar. God does not consult your past to determine your future. He does not need human approval to open doors for you. What he has spoken over your life will stand no matter who tries to stop it. Sometimes the challenges you face are not signs that you are on the wrong path, but proof that you are right where you need to be. The enemy doesn't fight people who aren't a threat. If you are facing resistance, it is because there is something powerful inside of you that the enemy wants to keep from being released. He knows that if you step into your calling, if you fully embrace the purpose God has for you, there is nothing he can do to stop you. That's why he works to distract you, to make you feel defeated before you even begin. But God's plan is bigger than the enemy's attacks. God does not promise a life without struggles, but he does promise victory. When the enemy tries to close a door, God has the power to open another one. When people reject you, when they walk away, when they doubt you, it does not change what God has already prepared for you. What is meant for you cannot be taken by anyone else. No amount of jealousy, no amount of opposition, no amount of deception can take away what is rightfully yours in God's plan. Even when it looks like everything is falling apart, God is still in control. The enemy can try to delay what God has for you, but he cannot deny it. Every obstacle, every setback, every hardship is simply a tool that God will use to shape you, to prepare you, to position you for what he has promised. Trust in his plan, because no enemy, no opposition, no circumstance can stop what God has already set in motion. Many times in life, things don't go as planned. You set out with expectations, believing that everything will fall into place, only to find yourself facing delays, detours, and disappointments. It can feel frustrating, like you are stuck or moving backward instead of forward. But what if the very obstacles in your path are not meant to stop you, but to strengthen you? What if the setbacks are not signs that you are losing, but preparation for something greater? God never promised a smooth road, but he did promise that his plan would prevail. Every challenge, every difficulty, every moment of struggle is part of the process he is using to refine you and prepare you for what's ahead. When things become difficult, it's easy to question if you are on the right path. You may wonder if God has forgotten you, if he has changed his mind about your purpose, or if you are wasting your time. But obstacles do not mean that God's plan has failed. They are often the very thing God is using to equip you for the next level. Growth happens in the struggle. Strength is developed in the challenges. If everything came easy, there would be no need for faith, no need for perseverance, no need for trust in God's timing. The difficulties you face are not there to break you, they are there to shape you. Look at the life of Moses. He was chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, but the journey was not easy. Before he ever stood before Pharaoh, he spent years in the wilderness. When he finally confronted Pharaoh, it did not happen quickly. Plague after plague came before the people were set free. Even after they left Egypt, the challenges you face in life are not random. They are often signs that you are walking in purpose. The enemy does not waste time attacking people who are not a threat. If you feel resistance, if you find yourself constantly battling doubt, fear, and unexpected obstacles, it is not because you are weak or incapable. It is because there is something powerful inside of you that the enemy is desperate to stop. The greater the attack, the greater the calling. When God has placed something extraordinary within you, the enemy will do everything he can to discourage you before you even begin. He knows that if you ever realize the power of your calling, if you ever step fully into the purpose God has ordained for you, his ability to hold you back will be destroyed. Throughout history, the people who made the greatest impact faced the greatest adversity. David was anointed to be king, yet before he ever sat on the throne, he was hunted, betrayed, and forced to live in hiding. Moses was called to lead an entire nation to freedom, yet he faced resistance at every turn. Paul carried the message of Christ to the world, but he was imprisoned, beaten, and persecuted. Their struggles were not proof that they were on the wrong path. Their struggles were evidence of their purpose. The enemy knew the power of their calling, and he fought to stop them before they could fulfill it. But God's plan always prevails. The enemy's goal is to make you give up before you step into the fullness of what God has for you. He wants to fill your mind with doubt, make you question whether you are truly meant for something greater. He will use rejection, fear, and failure as tools to wear you down. He will plant thoughts in your mind that tell you you're not good enough, not talented enough, not strong enough. But those are lies. The very fact that you are facing opposition is proof that you have something worth fighting for. The enemy does not attack what is not valuable. If he is trying to silence you, it is because your voice carries weight. If he is trying to slow you down, it is because you are meant to move forward with power. Resistance often comes at the moment you are closest to breakthrough. Right before something great happens, the pressure increases, the struggles intensify, the enemy works harder to convince you to walk away from what God has called you to do. But what he doesn't realize is that his attacks are only making you stronger. The very thing he is using to try to break you is the same thing God will use to elevate you. The pain, the struggle, the difficulties, they are not wasted. They are preparing you. Every trial you have faced is sharpening you, molding you, shaping you into the person God needs you to be in order to carry the weight of your calling. If there were no resistance, there would be no growth. If everything came easy, you would never develop the faith, the strength, or the endurance needed to fulfill your purpose. God allows challenges not to break you, but to build you. He allows struggles not to weaken you, but to strengthen you. What the enemy meant for harm, God will use for your good. Every hardship is a stepping stone. Every battle is a lesson. Every setback is a setup for something greater. The resistance you feel is not a sign that you are failing. It is confirmation that you are on the right path. The enemy knows he cannot take away what God has ordained for you, so he does everything in his power to make you believe that you are not worthy of it. But his attacks are not stronger than God's promises. Faith is the foundation that separates those who walk in God's promises from those who give in to fear. Fear is the tool the enemy uses to keep you stagnant, to make you hesitate when you should be moving forward. It whispers doubts in your mind, making you believe that the obstacles are too big, the challenge is too overwhelming, and the future too uncertain. But faith silences fear. Faith is the assurance that no matter what things look like right now, God is still in control. It is the confidence that even when you don't see a way, God has already made one. Fear thrives in uncertainty, but faith grows in trust. The enemy knows that if he can make you afraid, he can stop you before you ever step into your destiny. He knows that if he can fill your heart with doubt, you will begin to question whether God's promises apply to you. He wants you to believe that you are not strong enough, not capable enough, not worthy enough. But God does not choose people based on their own strength. He chooses them based on his power working through them. When you operate in faith, you are no longer relying on your own ability, but on God's unlimited strength. The Bible is filled with moments where faith overcame fear. When Peter saw Jesus walking on water, he had the faith to step out of the boat. But the moment he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the wind and waves, fear took hold and he began to sink. The storm was never the problem. It was his loss of faith that caused him to stumble. The same is true for you. The challenges in your life are not the issue. It is whether you allow fear to dictate your steps or whether you choose to walk by faith. Fear will tell you to stay where it's safe, to avoid taking risks, to wait until everything is certain. But faith calls you to step forward even when you don't have all the answers. When God told Joshua to lead the Israelites into the Promised Land, the path was not easy. They had to cross the Jordan River at flood stage. They had to march around the walls of Jericho not knowing when they would fall. But every victory required faith. If they had let fear control them, they never would have stepped into the land God had promised them. Many people miss out on what God has for them because they wait for the fear to disappear before they take action. But faith does not mean the absence of fear. It means moving forward despite it. The enemy wants to keep you trapped in a cycle of hesitation, constantly second-guessing yourself, constantly waiting for the perfect moment. But there is no perfect moment. If you are waiting until you feel ready, you will be waiting forever. Faith requires action. It requires trusting God even when the path is unclear. It requires believing that his plan is greater than your fear. The enemy will try to intimidate you with thoughts of failure, rejection, and uncertainty. But faith declares that no matter what happens, God is with you. Even if things don't go the way you expected, even if there are detours and delays, faith assures you that God is still leading you. Fear will always try to paralyze you, but faith sets you free. Fear magnifies the problems, but faith magnifies God's power. Fear tells you to retreat, but faith tells you to advance. When you walk in faith, you are no longer limited by what you can see. You are trusting in the unseen, in the promises of God that are greater than any obstacle. Faith is not about having all the answers. It is about knowing that God does. When you choose faith over fear, you step into the life that God has called you to live. Obedience is not always easy, but it is always necessary. When God calls you to move forward, he does not always show you the full picture. He does not always reveal every detail or give you a clear map of how things will unfold. Instead, he requires you to trust him step by step, even when the path seems uncertain. The enemy will try to use this uncertainty to keep you from moving. He will plant doubts in your mind, making you question whether you are truly hearing from God or whether you are making the right decision. But obedience is not about having all the answers. It is about trusting the one who does. Many people miss out on what God has for them because they hesitate. They wait for the perfect conditions, for all the risks to disappear, for a guarantee that everything will work out exactly as they hope. But faith does not work that way. God does not promise that the journey will be free of challenges, but he does promise to guide you through them. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. When God tells you to move, when he places something in your heart, you are not meant to sit back and wait for everything to make sense. You are meant to take the next step, even if you can't see the full staircase. The Bible is filled with examples of people who had to move forward before they saw the results. When God told Abraham to leave his home and go to a land that he would show him, Abraham had no idea where he was going. He did not have a destination. He only had a promise, but he obeyed, and because of his obedience, he became the father of many nations. When Moses stood before the Red Sea with the Egyptians closing in behind him, God told him to lift his staff and stretch out his hand. The waters did not part before he obeyed. They parted after he took action. When Jesus told Peter to cast his net on the other side of the boat after a long night of catching nothing, Peter could have argued. He could have let his frustration keep him from obeying, but instead he said, "Because you say so, I will." And in that moment of obedience, the miracle happened. Obedience is not about understanding, it is about trust. There will be times when God asks you to do things that do not make sense to your natural mind. He may tell you to walk away from something that looks good because he has something better. He may tell you to take a risk when everything in you wants to play it safe. He may ask you to forgive when you would rather hold on to resentment. But every time you obey, you position yourself for his blessings. The enemy knows this, which is why he fights so hard to keep you in a place of hesitation. He wants you to overthink, to doubt, to analyze, until you talk yourself out of what God has already confirmed. The path God has for you is not meant to be navigated by human reasoning alone. If you only move when things make sense, you will always be limited by your own understanding. But when you move in obedience, you allow God to work in ways beyond what you could ever imagine. Sometimes, the breakthrough you are waiting for is on the other side of a single act of obedience. The door you need to walk through is already unlocked, but you have to be willing to step forward. The provision, the opportunity, the answer, it is all waiting for you, but you must move in faith. The enemy will try to convince you that it is too risky, that you should wait, that you need more confirmation. But when God has already spoken, your job is not to question, it is to obey. Victory is not something you have to chase. It is something you already have. When God declares something over your life, no force in the world can change it. The enemy wants you to believe that you are constantly fighting for victory, that you have to struggle, strive, and prove yourself to earn what God has promised. But the truth is, you are not fighting for victory, you are fighting from victory. The moment God spoke his promises over you, they became reality in the spiritual realm. The enemy cannot take away what God has already secured, but he will try to convince you that it is not yours. The enemy works through deception. He knows he cannot remove God's favor from your life, so he tries to make you doubt it. He whispers lies that make you question your worth, your purpose, and your ability to walk in what God has already given you. He magnifies your struggles, making them seem bigger than they really are. He reminds you of every failure, every mistake, every reason you are not qualified. But his power is in the illusion, not in reality. The only way he wins is if you believe the lies more than you believe God's promises. In the Bible, when the Israelites stood before the promised land, God had already given it to them. It was theirs by divine decree. But when they saw the giants in the land, fear overtook them. They allowed what they saw to outweigh what God had spoken. Instead of stepping into their victory, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. The land was already theirs, but their own doubt kept them from possessing it. The enemy did not take it from them. They forfeited it by refusing to trust what God had already said. The same applies to you. There are blessings, breakthroughs, and opportunities with your name on them already established by God. The enemy will try to make you think that you have to earn them, that you have to be perfect, that you have to meet certain conditions before you can walk in them. But God's promises are not based on your perfection, they are based on his faithfulness. What he has spoken will come to pass, regardless of who tries to stop it. The only thing that can delay your victory is your own hesitation to believe and step into it. Victory does not mean the absence of battles. It means that no matter what comes against you, it cannot defeat you. The enemy may try to attack your mind, your finances, your relationships, but he is already fighting a losing battle. When Jesus died on the cross and rose again, he stripped the enemy of his power. He declared once and for all that those who trust in him are more than conquerors. The war has already been won, but you have to walk in that victory. You have to declare it, believe it, and refuse to let fear, doubt, or circumstances make you forget who you are in Christ. Every time you choose faith over fear, you are enforcing the victory that is already yours. Every time you refuse to give up, even when things get hard, you are reminding the enemy that he has no power over you. Every time you speak life over your situation instead of defeat, You are aligning yourself with God's promises. The enemy wants you to live in a defeated mindset, to constantly feel like you are struggling just to survive. But that is not the life God has called you to. You are not meant to live in fear, worry, or uncertainty. You are meant to walk with boldness, knowing that nothing can stand in the way of what God has already secured for you.